He thought he had planned the perfect romantic escape, a 7-day Caribbean cruise shrouded in secrecy and drenched in luxury. For Leonard Vance, it was the ultimate deception, a week with his beautiful young mistress, Tiffany, far from the prying eyes of his life back home, and miles away from his career-driven wife, Catherine. He'd spun a masterful tale of a mandatory corporate retreat in Miami, a lie as smooth as the expensive scotch in his hand. The champagne was chilled, the ocean beckoned, and his new life felt tantalizingly close. But as the magnificent vessel, the MM Serenity, pulled away from the port, a voice echoed through the ship's intercom, a voice that was cool, confident, and terrifyingly familiar. It was the voice of the ship's captain, and it was the voice of the wife he thought he'd left on shore. The air in the port of Miami was thick with a cocktail of salt, diesel, and anticipation. Leonard Vance adjusted his designer sunglasses, the Florida sun glinting off the ridiculously expensive watch on his wrist. It was a gift to himself, a celebratory token for a successful quarter, and, more importantly, for pulling this off. Beside him, Tiffany Monroe, all flowing sundress and wide-brimmed hat, squeezed his arm, her excitement a palpable, infectious buzz. "Oh, Leo, look at it. It's magnificent," she breathed, her eyes wide as she gazed up at the towering white hull of the MS Serenity. It wasn't just a ship. It was a floating city, a monument to leisure and luxury that promised to carry them away from everything mundane. "Only the best for you, my dear," Leo said, his voice a low, confident purr. He felt a surge of pride, of power. At 48, he was supposed to be settling into a comfortable, predictable middle age, but here he was, embarking on a clandestine adventure with a woman half his age who looked at him like he'd hung the moon. The lie had been surprisingly easy to construct. His wife, Catherine, was used to his business trips. Her own career was so demanding, so all-consuming, that his absences were often met with a distracted, "Okay, honey, be safe. Call me when you land." This time was no different. He'd packed his bag under the pretense of a week-long leadership conference for his financial firm, even printing a fake itinerary and leaving it on the kitchen counter for good measure. "I'll be in meetings most of the day, darling," he had told her over a hasty breakfast 2 days ago. "Probably spotty reception. Don't worry if you can't get through." Catherine, already dressed in a sharp, practical pantsuit, had just nodded, her mind clearly elsewhere. "Of course. Just focus on your work. I have the Gibraltar to Rotterdam route simulations to run all week anyway. It's going to be a long one." Her work. It was always her work. Captain Catherine Mercer. It still sounded strange to him sometimes, even after all these years. He'd been proud of her once. He'd bragged to his friends about his wife, who commanded massive container ships through treacherous waters. But pride had slowly curdled into resentment. Her long stints at sea, the weeks and sometimes months of an empty house, had carved a chasm between them. The woman he had married, full of laughter and warmth, had been replaced by a hardened professional who spoke in terms of nautical miles and barometric pressure. The sea was her true spouse. He was merely a port of call. Tiffany was the antidote to all of that. She was an intern at his firm, bright-eyed and ambitious, and she saw him not as the husband of an absentee captain, but as Leonard Vance, the brilliant senior partner. She hung on his every word, laughed at his tired jokes, and made him feel like the man he had always wanted to be. The affair had started with furtive lunches and escalated to late nights at the office, a fire that thawed the lonely chill of his life. This cruise was his grand gesture. He was testing the waters, literally and figuratively, for a new life with her. He'd booked the Grand Astoria suite, a sprawling space with a private balcony, a jacuzzi tub, and a complimentary bottle of Dom Perignon waiting on ice. Mr. and Mrs. Vance, a porter in a crisp white uniform asked, taking their luggage. Leo didn't flinch at the name. He had booked it under his own, a foolish, arrogant move. But he'd reasoned that Catherine would never in a million years have reason to check a cruise ship's passenger manifest. "That's us," he said smoothly, slipping the man a $50 bill. As they walked up the gangway, the sheer scale of the ship's interior hit them. A grand atrium soared 10 decks high, with glass elevators gliding silently up and down its sides. A string quartet was playing softly on a mezzanine level, the elegant notes weaving through the excited chatter of the embarking passengers. It smelled of new carpet, expensive perfume, and limitless possibility. "Leo, this is unreal," Tiffany whispered, clutching his arm tighter. Their suite was even better than the pictures online. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling glass doors that led to their private balcony. The bed was enormous, piled high with plush pillows. And there, in a silver bucket, was the promised champagne. Leo popped the cork with a flourish, the sound echoing his own bubbling sense of triumph. He poured 2 crystal flutes, handing one to Tiffany. "A toast," he said, clinking his glass against hers. "To new beginnings. To us." She smiled, a dazzling, intoxicating smile that made him feel 20 years younger. "To us." They drank the champagne on the balcony as the ship's horn blared, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the deck. They watched the Miami skyline recede, the buildings shrinking into a distant postcard. For the first time in years, Leo felt utterly, completely free. He was anonymous here, just another wealthy man spoiling his beautiful wife. The guilt that had been a constant, low-level hum in the back of his mind finally fell silent, drowned out by the rhythmic churn of the ocean and Tiffany's delighted laughter. He had thought of everything. He had covered every track. For the next 7 days, Catherine didn't exist. His marriage, his responsibilities, his quiet, lonely house, it all belonged to a man he had left behind on the shore. Here, on the vast, unforgiving ocean, he was a new man, and his future was as bright and boundless as the horizon in front of them. While Leonard Vance toasted to his new life, 500 feet forward and 14 decks above, Captain Catherine Mercer stood on the bridge of the MS Serenity, her world a quiet, controlled symphony of technology and human expertise. The expansive space was a cocoon of calm efficiency, the panoramic windows offering an unobstructed 180-degree view of the sea. The setting sun painted the sky in strokes of orange and violet, but Catherine's focus was on the myriad of screens displaying charts, radar data, and engine telemetry. Her uniform was immaculate, a crisp white shirt with gold-striped epaulets denoting her rank, navy trousers, and polished black shoes. At 45, her face was framed by dark hair, pulled back in a severe but practical bun, with a few stray strands of silver at her temples. Her blue eyes, accustomed to scanning distant horizons, held a steady, unwavering authority. She moved with an economy of motion, her presence filling the bridge with a quiet confidence that her crew respected and relied upon. "Heading 090, Commander," she said, her voice calm and even, cutting through the low electronic hum. 090, Captain, her first officer, Ava Rostova, confirmed from the navigation console. Ava, a sharp and loyal officer in her late 30s, had served under Catherine for 3 years. She knew her captain's moods better than anyone, recognizing the subtle shift in her posture or the slight tightening of her jaw that betrayed any inner turmoil. For Catherine, the bridge was a sanctuary. The sea was demanding, unforgiving, but it was also honest. It held no deceptions, no hidden agendas. You respected its power, you understood its rules, and in return, it offered a profound sense of purpose. It was a stark contrast to her life on land, which had become a sea of unspoken resentments and widening emotional distances. Her marriage to Leo had once been her anchor. He was charming, ambitious, and had seemed to understand her passion for her career. But over the years, his understanding had frayed into impatience. Her promotions, which should have been moments of shared celebration, became sources of friction. "Another 3 months away, Kate? When do I get to have a wife?" he'd ask, the question laced with a guilt she refused to carry. She had tried to explain that this wasn't a job, it was a calling. She was one of a handful of women in the world to command a vessel of this class. It was a legacy she was building, not just for herself, but for the women who would come after her. He just couldn't see it. Last night, she had received the final passenger manifest. It was a routine part of her pre-departure duties, a document she usually scanned with professional detachment. But one name had leapt off the page, a gut punch that had stolen the air from her lungs. Vance, Leonard, Suite 1401, Grand Astoria Suite. She had stared at it for a full minute, her mind refusing to process the information. It had to be a mistake, a coincidence, another Leonard Vance. But the address listed for billing was their home address. The emergency contact was listed as Catherine Mercer, her own name. The blood had drained from her face. His leadership conference in Miami, his vague answers about the hotel, the way he'd avoided her eyes when he kissed her goodbye. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. He wasn't just cheating. He was doing it with an audacious, insulting arrogance, bringing his affair into her world, onto her ship. He was so convinced of her distance, so certain of her obliviousness, that he believed he could hide in plain sight. For a moment, a wave of pure, hot rage had washed over her. She'd imagined storming down to Suite 1401 and confronting them, the righteous, wronged wife. She'd pictured the shock on his face, the shame, but the rage had subsided as quickly as it came, replaced by something colder, harder, and far more familiar. Control. She was Captain Catherine Mercer. She did not create scenes. She commanded them. This was her ship, her domain. He wasn't a cheating husband here. He was a passenger, and he would abide by her rules. Now, as the ship settled into its course, she maintained an unreadable expression. Only Ava noticed the almost imperceptible tension in her shoulders. "Everything all right, Captain?" Ava asked quietly, her gaze flickering from the radar to Catherine's face. Catherine's eyes remained fixed on the horizon. "Perfectly fine, Commander. Just ensuring a smooth departure." An hour later, as the last vestiges of daylight disappeared and the ship became an island of glittering light on an endless dark sea, the time came for the captain's welcome announcement. It was a standard procedure, a message to be piped into every suite and public area, welcoming the 3,000 passengers aboard. Catherine picked up the broadcast microphone, her knuckles white. She took a slow, steadying breath, not as a wife preparing for a confrontation, but as a captain assuming command. She pressed the button. A soft chime echoed throughout the vessel, silencing the ambient music in the lounges and suites. In Suite 1401, Leo and Tiffany were laughing, a half-empty bottle of champagne between them. Tiffany was recounting a story about a clumsy colleague, and Leo was listening, feeling relaxed and happy. The chime sounded, and he paused, a glass halfway to his lips. Then the voice came. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome aboard the MS Serenity. This is your captain, Catherine Mercer, speaking." The crystal flute slipped from Leo's fingers, shattering on the plush carpet and splashing champagne across his trousers. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, horrified pallor. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. It wasn't possible. It was a hallucination, a cruel, bizarre joke. Tiffany stopped laughing, her brow furrowed in confusion at his reaction. "Leo, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." But Leo couldn't answer. He was frozen, his eyes wide with terror, listening to the voice that had haunted his quiet, lonely nights, now echoing from the ceiling speaker. It was a voice he knew better than his own, but it was different, imbued with an unshakable authority and a cold, professional cadence he had never heard before. "We have just cleared the port of Miami and are now on a direct course for our first port of call, Phillipsburg, St. Martin. Our current speed is 22 knots, with calm seas and clear skies ahead. I, along with my exceptional crew, are dedicated to ensuring you have a safe, memorable, and luxurious journey with us. On behalf of everyone here, I wish you a wonderful evening and a fantastic voyage." The broadcast ended. The soft lounge music faded back in. But for Leonard Vance, the silence that followed was deafening. The gilded cage he had so carefully constructed had just slammed shut, and he realized, with a dawning, sickening horror, that his wife wasn't just the ship's captain. She was his jailer. Panic seized Leo in its icy grip. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. He stared at the speaker on the ceiling as if it were a malevolent eye that had just pronounced his doom. Catherine. Captain Catherine Mercer. His Catherine. "Leo, what is it?" Tiffany demanded, her voice sharp with a mixture of concern and irritation. She knelt to pick up the broken shards of the champagne flute, her perfect mood shattered. "You're white as a sheet. Who is Catherine Mercer?" Leo's mind was a maelstrom of denial and terror. He couldn't form a coherent thought. How? Why? She was supposed to be running simulations for a route in a different hemisphere. She had never once captained a commercial cruise liner. Her entire career had been in cargo and freight. Had she lied to him? Was this some elaborate, twisted trap she had laid? She's my wife," he finally choked out, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Tiffany froze, a piece of broken glass in her hand. Her perfectly made-up face contorted, first in disbelief, then in dawning comprehension, and finally in pure fury. "Your wife?" she hissed, standing up slowly. "Your wife is the captain of this ship. Are you kidding me, Leo? Is this some kind of sick joke?" "I didn't know. I swear I had no idea," he stammered, scrambling for an explanation that didn't exist. "She pilots container ships. This doesn't make any sense." He ran a trembling hand through his hair. "She must have changed assignments. A last-minute transfer. A last-minute transfer that you conveniently failed to mention?" Tiffany's voice rose, her initial adoration for him evaporating like sea spray. "You told me she was practically a ghost. You told me she was halfway across the world. Instead, she's flying the plane we're on." "It's a ship, not a plane," he said weakly, the correction earning him a venomous glare. "Don't be an idiot, Leo. You know what I mean. We are trapped on a floating hotel for 7 days with your wife in charge." She began pacing the luxurious suite, her movements agitated and sharp like a caged animal. "What are we going to do? Does she know we're here?" The question hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. Of course she knew. His name on the manifest, the suite number, the shared surname he had so arrogantly used. She knew everything. That welcome announcement wasn't a coincidence. It was a declaration, a shot across the bow. "We have to get off," Leo said, a desperate plan forming. "At the next port, we'll just get off." "The next port is in 2 days, Leo," Tiffany shrieked. "What do we do until then? Hide in this room, order room service for 48 hours straight, and pray she doesn't come knocking on the door?" The thought of Catherine appearing at their door, her face a mask of cold fury, sent a fresh wave of nausea through him. He felt trapped, exposed, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. The power dynamic had been completely inverted. On land, he held the cards. He was the successful partner, the one with the money and the plan. Here, he was just a passenger. And she was the captain. She held absolute authority. His mind raced. He had to think. He had to regain control. Okay, calm down," he said, trying to soothe her and himself. "Let's just be discreet. It's a huge ship. There are 3,000 people on board. We can blend in. She's on the bridge. She's busy. She won't have time to seek us out." Even as he said it, he knew how foolish it sounded. Catherine missed nothing. Her attention to detail was legendary. She would know their dinner reservations, their show tickets, every single charge they made to their room. They were rats in a maze of her own design. The first major test was just hours away, the captain's welcome gala and cocktail reception. It was a formal event, a chance for the ship's senior officers to mingle with the passengers. Attendance wasn't mandatory, but its absence would be noted. Hiding would be an admission of guilt. Going would be walking directly into the lion's den. "We have to go to the gala," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Tiffany stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Absolutely not. I am not parading myself in front of your wife like some cheap prize you've won." "We have no choice," he insisted, his desperation making him bold. "If we don't show up, it looks like we're hiding. It's suspicious. We have to act normal. We'll go, have one drink, stay in the back, and leave. We'll pretend we didn't hear the announcement properly, that we thought she said Catherine Mercer, but it couldn't possibly be her." It was a flimsy, pathetic strategy, but it was all he had. Meanwhile, on the bridge, the ship sailed smoothly through the darkening water. Ava Rostova watched her captain, who had returned to her duties with an unnerving placidity. She hadn't mentioned the announcement or shown any sign of distress. But Ava had seen the passenger manifest. She had seen the name Vance next to the most expensive suite on the ship. She wasn't sure of the details, but she knew a storm was brewing, and it had nothing to do with the weather. "Captain," Ava said gently, "the welcome gala begins at 20 hours. Will you be attending the pre-reception with the senior staff?" Catherine turned from the window, her expression unreadable. For a fleeting second, Ava saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a deep, profound hurt. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a steely resolve. "Of course, Commander," Catherine said, her voice perfectly even. "I wouldn't miss it for the world. Have my dress uniform pressed and ready. I want to look my best when I greet our passengers." Her gaze drifted back to the dark ocean. She knew Leo and his companion would be agonizing over what to do. She knew they would feel the walls of their luxurious prison closing in, and she knew that tonight, at the gala, they would be forced to face her. The unveiling was over. The confrontation was about to begin. She would not be the wronged wife. She would be the captain, in full command, on her terms. The Starlight Ballroom was a spectacle of polished brass, gleaming crystal, and deep mahogany. A 10-piece orchestra played classic show tunes as waiters weaved through the well-dressed crowd with trays of champagne and intricate canapes. The room buzzed with the cheerful, unburdened energy of people on vacation. For Leo and Tiffany, it felt like a funeral procession, and they were the guests of honor. Leo's tuxedo felt like a straitjacket, the bow tie choking him. He had sweated through his first shirt while dressing. Tiffany stood beside him in a slinky, backless, crimson dress that, on any other night, would have made him feel like the luckiest man alive. Tonight, it felt like a garish costume, a beacon of their indiscretion. They had found a small table in a dimly lit corner, hoping to be swallowed by the shadows, but the ballroom was so brightly lit they felt utterly exposed. "Just one drink, then we leave," Leo muttered, downing his champagne in a single gulp and immediately grabbing another from a passing tray. "Stop it, you look terrified," Tiffany hissed, her own smile a brittle, painted-on facade. "You need to get a grip. You said to act normal. This isn't normal." But there was nothing normal about this. Every time the ballroom doors opened, Leo's heart leaped into his throat. He scanned the crowd, a nervous wreck, looking for a glimpse of her. He felt like a condemned man waiting for the executioner. Then, a hush fell over the room. The orchestra leader tapped his stand, and all eyes turned to the grand staircase at the far end of the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice boomed over the speakers, "may I present the senior officers of the MS Serenity and your captain, Catherine Mercer." The orchestra struck up a regal, welcoming tune. One by one, the senior officers descended the staircase in their immaculate dress uniforms, smiling and waving to the applauding passengers. And then, at the top of the stairs, she appeared. Catherine was a vision of command. Her white dress uniform was tailored to perfection, adorned with her medals and golden epaulets. Her dark hair was styled in an elegant chignon, and her face, under the soft lights of the chandeliers, was poised and serene. She descended the stairs with a grace and confidence that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. She wasn't just an officer. She was royalty. Leo felt Tiffany's nails dig into his arm. He couldn't breathe. This was not the woman he had left in their quiet suburban home. This was not the tired, distracted wife who spoke of cargo manifests. This was a powerful, formidable woman who commanded a 100,000-ton vessel and the unwavering respect of 1,000 crew members. He had never seen her like this. He had never truly understood the scope of her world, and in that moment, he had never felt smaller. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom. It was only for a second, but it was enough. He saw no anger, no hatred, no tears. He saw nothing but a calm, cool assessment. The same look she might give a distant storm cloud on the horizon. It was a look of utter, chilling indifference, and it terrified him more than any screaming match could have. She broke eye contact first, turning her attention to the guests, smiling warmly as she shook hands with an elderly couple. She began to work the room, accompanied by her first officer, moving with an effortless poise. She was the consummate host, laughing, chatting, and putting everyone at ease. Everyone but him. Leo watched her slow, deliberate path through the ballroom, a path that was inexorably, tortuously, leading directly to their dark corner. He wanted to run, to bolt from the room, but his feet were cemented to the floor. "She's coming over here," Tiffany whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Leo, do something." But what could he do? He was paralyzed. Finally, she stood before their table. First Officer Rostova stood a respectful pace behind her, her expression neutral, but her eyes missing nothing. The cheerful music of the orchestra seemed to fade into a distant hum. "Good evening," Catherine said, her voice as smooth and cool as the champagne in her hand. She wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed entirely on Tiffany. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Captain Mercer. Welcome aboard my ship." Tiffany, caught off guard, stammered, Tiffany Monroe. It's a beautiful ship, Captain. We're proud of her," Catherine replied, her smile never reaching her eyes. Then, and only then, did she turn her gaze to Leo. It was like being pinned by a searchlight. "Leonard, what a surprise. I wasn't aware your leadership conference was a maritime affair this year." The polite public cruelty of the remark was a physical blow. He felt the blood rush to his face. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was a fish, gasping for air on the deck. It was a last-minute change," he finally managed, the lie so flimsy it was insulting. "I see," Catherine said, her tone implying she saw everything with perfect clarity. She took a small sip of her drink, her eyes never leaving his. "Well, I certainly hope the company is to your liking." She glanced pointedly at Tiffany, then back at him. "You've booked the Grand Astoria suite. An excellent choice. It has a wonderful view of the ship's wake, all the things you're leaving behind." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, coated in a poison of politeness that made it impossible for him to react without causing a scene. He was being dismantled, piece by piece, in full view of everyone, yet no one could see the blade. "You'll find we run a very tight ship here, Leonard," she continued, her voice dropping almost to a whisper. For his ears only. "Everything is logged. Everything is noted. There are no secrets at sea. Remember that." She gave him one last, lingering look, a look that stripped him of all his self-importance and left him feeling like a foolish, errant child. Then she turned her brilliant, false smile back on. "Well, I must continue my rounds. Do enjoy the rest of your evening." She gave a slight nod. "Miss Munro." And with that, she was gone, gliding away to greet other passengers, leaving Leo and Tiffany in a bubble of stunned, humiliated silence. The orchestra swelled, the chatter returned, but their world had been irrevocably shattered. The confrontation was over. The psychological warfare had just begun. The MS Serenity became a prison of paradise. Every luxury, the gourmet restaurants, the sparkling pools, the vibrant casino, felt tainted, imbued with the spectre of Catherine's authority. Leo and Tiffany were no longer on a romantic getaway. They were inmates in a floating panopticon, constantly under surveillance. Catherine never sought them out again directly. She didn't have to. Her power was ambient, woven into the very fabric of the ship's daily life. When they went to the formal dining room, they found themselves seated at the worst table, tucked away near the noisy clatter of the kitchen doors. When they booked a couple's massage at the spa, their appointment was regrettably lost due to a system glitch. Their room service was always inexplicably late, and their cabin steward seemed to clean their suite only at the most inconvenient times, forcing them out onto their balcony, where they felt watched by 1,000 unseen eyes. These were small, petty inconveniences, impossible to prove as deliberate acts of malice, but their cumulative effect was suffocating. Leo knew it was her, a silent, methodical campaign of psychological attrition. He saw her from a distance sometimes, standing on a wing of the bridge, observing the passengers below, or walking the promenade deck with her senior officers. She never acknowledged him, her gaze always sweeping past him, as if he were just another piece of deck furniture. Her indifference was a far crueler punishment than her anger would have been. The ship's crew, loyal to their captain, became instruments of his torment. Their service remained professional, but there was a new, subtle edge to it. The bartenders seemed to take longer to serve him. The waiters met his eyes with a knowing pity that made his skin crawl. He could feel the whispers that followed them as they walked through the public areas. He didn't know how the story had spread. Perhaps a knowing glance from a senior officer, a bit of gossip from the bridge, but he had no doubt that the crew knew. They were the couple in 14-1, the captain's cheating husband and his mistress, They were a scandal, a cautionary tale. Tiffany was not handling the pressure well. The glamorous, carefree woman who had boarded the ship in Miami had been replaced by a tense, irritable stranger. The fantasy had been brutally punctured, and she was left with the grim reality of the situation. "Everyone is staring at us," she complained, as they sat by the adult-only pool, trying to pretend they were having a good time. "That woman over there has been looking at us and whispering to her friend for 10 minutes. "You're being paranoid," Leo snapped, though he knew she was right. "I'm not being paranoid, Leo. This is a nightmare," she retorted, her voice a low, angry hiss. "Your wife is toying with us. She's making our lives miserable, and you're just sitting here, letting her do it." "What do you want me to do, Tiffany?" he shot back, his own nerves frayed to the breaking point. "March up to the bridge and demand she stop? She's the captain. She could have me put in the brig if she wanted to." He wasn't entirely sure if cruise ships still had brigs, but the image was terrifyingly vivid. Their days took on a miserable routine. They would wake up late, have a tense breakfast in their suite, and then try to find some secluded corner of the ship where they could avoid the judgmental eyes of the crew and other passengers. The beautiful Caribbean ports of call, St. Martin, St. Thomas, offered little respite. Even on land, surrounded by thousands of other tourists, they felt like fugitives, expecting to see Catherine's steely gaze around every corner. Halfway through the cruise, a squall hit the ship. It wasn't a dangerous storm, but it was strong enough to create rough seas. The vessel began to pitch and roll, and an announcement was made for passengers to remain in their cabins or seated in the main lounges. From their suite, Leo and Tiffany watched the dark, churning waves slam against their balcony doors. The ship groaned and creaked, sounds that were deeply unsettling to a landlubber like Leo. He felt a primal fear, a complete loss of control. He was at the mercy of the storm and at the mercy of the one person who could navigate them through it. Just then, Catherine's voice came over the intercom, the same calm, reassuring tone from the first night. "Good afternoon, passengers. This is your captain speaking. We are currently experiencing some inclement weather, with winds gusting up to 40 knots. Please be assured that this is well within the operating capabilities of the MS Serenity. I and my experienced bridge team are monitoring the situation closely, and I have adjusted our course to minimize the discomfort. The worst of the weather should pass within the next 2 hours. In the meantime, please exercise caution when moving about the ship." Hearing her voice, so steady and competent amidst the chaos, was the final humiliation. While he was cowering in his cabin, she was up on the bridge, fighting the storm, commanding the elements, responsible for the lives of 3,000 souls. She was magnificent, and he was nothing. A stowaway, a pathetic secret. Tiffany looked at him, her expression a mixture of fear and contempt. "She's in complete control, isn't she?" she said, the words a quiet admission of defeat. He could only nod. The last embers of Tiffany's attraction to him were being extinguished by the storm. She had been drawn to his power, his confidence, his success in the corporate world. But on this ship, his world meant nothing. He was powerless, a cuckolded husband being taught a slow, brutal lesson by a wife he had fatally underestimated. The whispers on the water had become a roar, and it was the sound of his life capsizing. The storm passed, leaving behind calm seas and a permanently altered emotional landscape in Suite 1401. The illusion of their affair, once so glittering and potent, was now a waterlogged wreck. For Tiffany, the cruise had become an excruciating exercise in public humiliation. The man she had admired, the powerful partner who promised her the world, had been reduced to a nervous, defeated shell. Her breaking point came on the 5th day, during a disastrous dinner at the ship's exclusive specialty restaurant, a place they had paid a hefty surcharge to attend. They were seated next to a table of senior officers, including Ava Rostova. The officers were polite, but their presence was an oppressive weight. Every bite of food tasted like cardboard. "I can't do this anymore, Leo," Tiffany said, pushing her plate of barely touched lobster away. Her voice was flat, devoid of its earlier fire. "This is over." Leo looked up, startled. "What are you talking about? We just have to get through 2 more days." "No, we don't have to do anything," she corrected him. "I am done. This whole thing, it was a mistake. I see that now." She looked at him, her eyes clear and cold. "You told me she didn't care. You told me your marriage was a formality. You lied to me. You're terrified of her. And frankly, seeing you like this, it's not attractive." The words were a brutal, final blow to his already shattered ego. "Tiffany, please, don't," she cut him off. "I'm going to go talk to her." Leo stared at her, horrified. "Are you insane? You can't do that. What would you even say?" "I'm going to appeal to her, woman to woman," Tiffany said, a naive determination in her eyes. "I'll tell her I made a mistake, that I was misled. I'll apologize. Maybe she'll have some decency and let me off this floating hellhole at the next port." Before Leo could protest further, she stood up, smoothed her dress, and walked resolutely out of the restaurant. He was left alone at the table, the sympathetic stares of the ship's officers burning into his back. Tiffany, using a combination of charm and desperation, managed to get a message to the bridge, requesting a brief, private word with the captain. She was told to wait in a small, sterile officers' lounge near the command center. After 20 minutes that felt like an eternity, the door opened and Captain Catherine Mercer entered. She was still in her working uniform, her face impassive. She didn't sit down. "You have 5 minutes, Miss Monroe," Catherine said, her voice devoid of any warmth. Tiffany swallowed hard, her carefully rehearsed speech suddenly feeling foolish. "Captain Mercer, Catherine, I wanted to apologize for everything. I was wrong. Leo, Mr. Vance, he told me things about your marriage. He misled me." Catherine listened without a single flicker of emotion. Her silence was more intimidating than any outburst would have been. "Are you finished?" she asked when Tiffany trailed off. Yes. I just want to get off this ship. I want to go home. If you could just let me disembark at Nassau tomorrow." Catherine took a step closer, her blue eyes pinning Tiffany in place. "Let me be very clear, Miss Monroe. My marriage and what my husband told you are of no concern to me. You are a passenger on my vessel, and you entered into a personal arrangement with another passenger. That is your business." However, her voice dropped, taking on a razor's edge. "You have made it my business by conducting this affair on my ship. You have created a situation that is a distraction and a potential disruption to the good order of this vessel." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "I am not interested in your apologies or your excuses. I am interested only in resolution. So here is my offer. At Nassau, a private tender will be waiting at 8 hours. It will take you to the shore. From there, you will be escorted to the airport, where a one-way ticket to Miami in your name will be waiting for you. You will take your handbag, and that is all. The rest of your luggage will be sent to your home address. You will not speak to my husband again. You will not attempt to contact him. In return, I will consider this matter concluded." Tiffany stared at her, stunned by the cold, logistical efficiency of the proposal. There was no negotiation, no discussion. It was a command. "And if I don't agree?" Tiffany asked weakly, A small, humorless smile touched Catherine's lips. "Then you will remain on this ship until we return to Miami. But I can assure you, Miss Monroe, the final 48 hours of your journey will be profoundly unpleasant." There was no choice. "I agree," Tiffany whispered. "Excellent," Catherine said, her tone all business. "Be at gangway C at 08. Sort of sharp." She turned and left without another word. When Tiffany returned to the suite, she found Leo pacing anxiously. She told him about the conversation, about the offer. He listened, his face crumbling with each word. "You're just going to leave?" he asked, his voice cracking. "You're just going to leave me here, alone?" "This was never about us, Leo," she said, her voice filled with a final, weary pity. "This was about you and her. I was just a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. Goodbye." She spent the night on the sofa. The next morning, Leo, driven by a desperate, last-ditch effort to salvage some semblance of control, did the one thing he should never have done. He took a crew-only elevator and made his way up to the bridge. When he found the door, he hammered on it with his fists. "Catherine, we need to talk! Open this door!" The door was opened instantly by two burly security officers. Ava Rostova stood behind them, her face a mask of cold fury. "Mr. Vance, this is a restricted area," Ava said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Access to the navigational bridge is strictly forbidden for all passengers. You are compromising the safety of this vessel." "I need to speak to my wife," he yelled, trying to push past them. From inside the bridge, Catherine's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Commander Rostova, the passenger seems to be disoriented and is causing a security issue. Please escort him back to his suite and confine him there until further notice. He is to have no access to any of the ship's bars or lounges. Post a guard at his door." "Yes, Captain," Ava said. Leo's frantic struggles were useless against the two security men. They dragged him away, a babbling, humiliated mess, down the sterile crew corridors. He had played his last card and lost spectacularly. He was no longer just a passenger. He was a prisoner, confined to the very suite that was supposed to have been his love nest, a testament to his spectacular, catastrophic failure. The final day of the cruise was a long, silent torment for Leo. He was a captive in his opulent suite, with a polite but unyielding security guard stationed outside his door. The champagne was gone, replaced by bottles of complimentary water. The vibrant life of the ship, the music, the laughter, the announcements for bingo and trivia, filtered through the door as distant, mocking echoes of a world he was no longer a part of. He tried to watch television, but his mind couldn't focus. He stood on his balcony for hours, watching the endless blue of the ocean, feeling his insignificance in its vastness. Tiffany was gone. He had watched her from the balcony at 8 a.m. sharp, a small, lonely figure climbing into a waiting boat and speeding away towards the Nassau shore, disappearing from his life as quickly as she had entered it. He was utterly, completely alone. The humiliation was a physical ache in his chest. He replayed the entire week in his mind, a slideshow of his own arrogance and stupidity. He had seen Catherine as a predictable, distant part of his life, a fixture he could easily manage and deceive. He had never truly seen her, the formidable intellect, the steely discipline, the quiet strength that allowed her to command the respect of 1,000 people and guide a vessel the size of a skyscraper through the world's oceans. He hadn't just cheated on his wife, he had fundamentally disrespected the very core of who she was, and she had responded by reminding him, in no uncertain terms, of his own irrelevance in her world. As the MS Serenity sailed into the port of Miami in the early morning light, the sight of the familiar skyline brought no relief, only a sense of finality. His sham of a life was over. The game was up. An hour after the ship had docked and the noisy bustle of disembarking passengers had begun, there was a sharp knock on his door. It wasn't the guard. He opened it to find First Officer Ava Rostova. "The captain will see you now," she said, her expression unreadable. "Follow me." She led him not down to the gangway, but up through a series of private corridors to the captain's personal quarters. The suite was spacious but Spartan, decorated with nautical charts and framed photos of ships, not family. It was a room that belonged to a captain, not a wife. Catherine was standing by the large porthole, looking out at the port. She was no longer in her dress whites, but in the same kind of practical navy blue uniform she wore on the bridge. She didn't turn when he entered. "You are the last passenger on board, Leonard," she said, her voice quiet but resonant in the silent room. "I had you held so we could have this conversation without an audience." She finally turned to face him. Her face was tired, the mask of command laid aside, revealing the woman beneath. He saw the hurt there, finally, but it was overshadowed by an immense, unshakable strength. "I won't ask you why," she said. "I've spent enough nights alone at sea to understand loneliness, and enough time on land to understand betrayal. The why doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what happens now." Leo found his voice, a weak, hoarse thing. "Kate, I am so sorry. I never—" "Don't," she said, holding up a hand. "Don't you dare. Your apologies are as worthless as your lies. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught in the most spectacularly humiliating way possible." He couldn't deny it. He fell silent. "When I get home in 2 days, after my duties here are complete," she continued, her voice clinical and precise, "I expect your things to be gone. The house is in my name. It was mine before we married. You will find your belongings packed and in a storage unit, the key to which my lawyer will forward to yours. He will also be forwarding the divorce papers. I will be generous, far more generous than you deserve, on the condition that you sign them without contest. No arguments, no delays. A clean break." She walked to her desk and picked up a single sheet of paper. "This is a statement. It confirms that your confinement to your quarters was a result of a security breach on the bridge and your subsequent belligerent behavior. It makes no mention of our personal relationship. You will sign it. It will protect the cruise line, and it will give you a semi-plausible reason for your conduct, should anyone ask." She held it out to him. It was his final indignity, signing a document that legally codified his own pathetic downfall. He took the pen with a trembling hand and signed his name. "Good," she said, taking the paper back. "Now you can go." He stood there for a moment, a lifetime of memories, both good and bad, flashing through his mind. He looked at this incredible, powerful woman he had so carelessly thrown away, and felt a loss so profound it was a physical void. "Kate, for what it's worth," he began. "It's worth nothing, Leonard," she said, her voice softening just a fraction, not with pity, but with finality. "Goodbye." He turned and walked out of the room, escorted by Ava Rostova down to the empty gangway. As he stepped onto the solid ground of the port, he felt unsteady, as if the world were still rocking beneath his feet. He looked back up at the magnificent ship, at the distant, tinted windows of the bridge, where he knew she would soon be, and he understood. He had dropped his anchor in another woman's harbour, only to find that his wife was the master of the entire ocean. And so, Leonard Vance walked away, not just from a ship, but from a life he had single-handedly destroyed. Captain Catherine Mercer's story isn't just about revenge. It's a powerful testament to reclaiming your own narrative. She didn't crumble in the face of betrayal. She used the very authority and discipline her husband resented, to take back control of her life, proving that the greatest strength isn't found in avoiding storms, but in learning how to command your vessel right through them. Her journey from a wronged wife to the undisputed master of her own destiny is a reminder that we all have a captain's strength within us. If you were moved by Catherine's incredible story of resilience and empowerment, please let us know in the comments below. What would you have done in her situation? We love hearing your thoughts. And if you want more stories of justice, drama, and personal triumph, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more content just like this. Thank you for listening. The air in a Manhattan penthouse 60 floors above the sleeping city can make a man feel like a god. For tech billionaire Callahan Dreven, it was his Olympus. Fresh from the silken sheets of a woman who was not his wife, he felt invincible, the master of his universe. But invincibility is an illusion, and universes can collapse in an instant. As he stepped out of his private elevator and into the silent marble foyer of his own home, he expected to find his pregnant wife sleeping soundly. Instead, he found her waiting for him in the pale light of dawn, a single manila envelope resting on the table between them. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him with the calm of a settled storm and slid the envelope across the table. They were divorce papers, and that was only the beginning of his world's end. The scent of her was still on his skin, a heady mix of expensive perfume, fleur de nuit, and something uniquely her own, something wild and intoxicating. Callahan Dreven adjusted the cuff of his $30,000 Patek Philippe, watched the metallic click echoing the sterile precision of Sasha Petrova's apartment. Everything in her world was glass and chrome and monochrome, a landscape as sleek and emotionless as their affair. It was a perfect escape, a sterile chamber where he could shed the skin of husband, of impending father, and simply be the titan of industry, the conqueror. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair, a flicker of something not quite guilt, but a dull approximation of it stirring in his chest. He dismissed it. Guilt was an inefficient emotion. He loved his wife, Ginevra. Of course he did. He loved her in the way he loved his company, Dreven Innovations, with a fierce, possessive pride. She was beautiful, intelligent, the perfect complement to the life he had meticulously built. Their child, a son they'd already named Spencer, was the final triumphant piece of the puzzle. A legacy. The private elevator descended soundlessly, carrying him from the cold heights of his indiscretion back to the warmth of his life. As the doors whispered open directly into his tri-level residence overlooking Central Park, the contrast was immediate. The air here was different. It smelled of lemon polish, of the fresh flowers Ginevra insisted on having delivered twice a week, and faintly of the lavender-scented candles she burned to help her sleep. It smelled of home. A knot of tension he hadn't realized he was carrying began to dissolve. He'd slip into bed, wrap his arms around his wife's growing belly, and inhale the familiar, comforting scent of her hair. By morning, Sasha would be a ghost, a pleasant but forgettable dream. But the living room was not dark. A single soft lamp cast a pool of golden light on the custom-made Italian sofa. And in that light sat Ginevra. She wasn't in her usual silk pajamas. She was dressed in tailored slacks and a simple cashmere sweater, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a neat, professional chignon. Her face, usually so open and warm, was a mask of serene neutrality. Her blue eyes, which could sparkle with laughter or deepen with love, were as calm and cool as a frozen lake. She was 7 months pregnant, her belly a perfect proud curve beneath the sweater, but tonight she didn't look soft or maternal. She looked formidable. Ginevra Callahan's voice was a low murmur, his carefully constructed nonchalance suddenly feeling brittle. "You're up late, or early." He forced a smile, moving to shrug off his jacket. "Couldn't sleep." She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze tracked his movements, missing nothing. She saw the faint crease in his shirt that hadn't been there when he left for his late-night board dinner. She saw the microscopic speck of glitter on his collar, a relic from Sasha's shimmering cocktail dress. She saw the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "I slept," she said, her voice even and clear, devoid of the tremor he'd expected. "And then I woke up. I find I've been doing a lot of that lately." Waking up. He walked towards her, his movements suddenly feeling clumsy. He reached out to touch her cheek, a gesture that had always soothed her. She didn't flinch, but she didn't lean into his touch either. She simply sat there, allowing it, and her stillness was a more potent rejection than if she had slapped his hand away. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice dropping into the concerned, gentle tone he used to close billion-dollar deals and to calm her pregnancy-related anxieties. On the polished mahogany coffee table in front of her, next to a crystal vase of white tulips, was a thick manila envelope. It looked jarringly out of place, a bureaucratic intrusion into their curated domestic perfection. Ginevra finally looked away from him, her gaze falling to the envelope. "I think we need to talk about the future, Callahan." "Okay," he said, slowly pulling his hand back. "The future is great. We have Spencer on the way. The new wing of the hospital is about to open with our name on it. Draven Innovations is projected to break records next quarter." He listed his triumphs like a shield. "Our future is not a corporate prospectus," she replied, the first hint of steel entering her voice. She picked up the envelope. The paper was crisp, the weight of it substantial. "I'm talking about our future, yours and mine." She slid it across the table. It stopped inches from his hand. His name was typed on the front, with his lawyer's address underneath. Callahan J. Draven, C.O. Latham and Watkins, LLP. A cold dread, wholly unfamiliar, began to creep up his spine. He stared at the envelope, refusing to touch it, as if it were a venomous snake. "Ginevra. What is this? If this is about me being late, it's not about you being late, Callahan. It's about where you were." Her voice remained unnervingly calm. "It's about the penthouse you've been leasing under a shell corporation for the last 6 months. It's about the Cartier Love bracelet you purchased 2 weeks ago, the one that isn't on my wrist. It's about Sasha Petrova, the senior vice president of acquisitions at a rival firm of all people. Do you really think I'm that stupid, that I'm just another one of your beautiful passive assets?" His blood ran cold. He had been so careful. Encrypted communications, cash payments through his security chief, Rob Miller. A shell corporation so deeply buried it would take a forensic accountant months to unravel. How he opened his mouth to deny it, to lie, to gaslight, to do what he always did, reshape reality to his will. But the look in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't the fiery rage of a woman scorned. It was the detached pity of a physician diagnosing a terminal illness. She already knew. All of it. "Don't," she said softly, anticipating his denial. "Don't insult me by lying. Not now. I've given you 7 years of my life, Callahan. My loyalty. My body to carry your son. The very least you can give me is a moment of unvarnished truth." He sank onto the ottoman opposite her, the bravado draining from him, leaving behind a hollow, buzzing fear. He looked at the envelope again. "What is it, Ginevra?" He whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's a petition for dissolution of marriage." She stated, her voice as clear as a bell in the silent room. "I've filed for divorce. That's a copy for you. My brother filed the original papers with the court this morning. It's done. Divorce." The word hit him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. It was an impossibility, a bug in the code of his perfect life. People like him didn't get divorced. Their wives stood by them. They tolerated indiscretions. They understood the pressures men like him were under. They accepted the diamond bracelets and the lavish apologies, and kept the family portrait intact. "You can't be serious," he stammered, shaking his head. "Ginevra, you're pregnant. We're having a baby. You can't do this to us." To him, for the first time, an emotion flickered across her face, a profound, weary sadness. "I'm not doing this to him, Callahan. I'm doing this for him. I will not raise my son in a house where his mother is a fool and his father is a liar. I won't teach him that love is about possession and loyalty is a transaction. He deserves better." She stood up, her movements fluid and deliberate. "And so do I." She walked past him, her scent the real one, the one that smelled of lavender and home washing over him for a brief, agonizing moment. He reached out, grabbing her wrist. "Wait, we can fix this. I'll end it. I'll do anything. Counseling, whatever you want." Ginevra looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. Her expression was unreadable. "The time for fixing things was yesterday, Callahan, or the day before that, or any of the dozens of days you chose to lie to my face. The only thing left to do now is to be civilized about the separation of our assets." She gently pulled her arm free from his grasp. "My brother Leo will be in touch with your lawyer. I've already packed a bag. I'll be staying with him until my new place is ready." She walked towards the foyer without a second glance. The titan of industry, the man who could move markets with a single tweet, was left kneeling on a Persian rug, his world reduced to a single manila envelope. The dawn was breaking over Central Park, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but for Callahan Draven, the world had just gone completely irrevocably dark. Callahan remained motionless for a long time, the silence of the massive apartment pressing in on him. The divorce papers sat on the table like a death sentence. His first instinct was denial, a complete system rejection of this new reality. This was a tantrum, a dramatic, hormonal, pregnancy-fueled outburst. She would cool down. She would realize what she was throwing away. He would send flowers an entire greenhouse of them. He would buy her that ridiculously expensive painting she'd admired. He would grovel. He would win. He finally reached for the envelope, his fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a cold, brutal stack of legal documents. Irreconcilable differences. The phrase was a mockery. Their lives were perfectly reconciled, a merger of his power and her grace. He scanned the pages, his eyes catching on clauses and demands. Exclusive use of the Bridgehampton property pending settlement, liquidation of joint portfolio accounts, full physical custody of the unborn child, Spencer Cole Draven. That last line was a knife to the heart. His son. The idea that another man, Leo Morrison, her sanctimonious lawyer brother, had typed those words, had plotted with his wife to take his child, ignited a new feeling rage. The hollow fear was replaced by a white-hot fury. How dare she, after everything he'd given her? He grabbed his phone, his thumb hovering over her contact. No. This required a more powerful tool. He dialed his lawyer, David Chen, the most ruthless litigator in New York. "David?" He barked when the man answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Wake up. We have a problem. A big one." 2 days later, Callahan sat in David Chen's sterile conference room, the reality of the situation sinking in like concrete. Ginevra wasn't backing down. She wasn't answering his calls, texts, or the desperate emails he'd sent. The mountain of flowers he'd had delivered to her brother's address had been sent back, refused. "She's not bluffing, Callahan," David said, pushing a file across the table. "This isn't a spontaneous act. This is a meticulously planned operation. Her brother isn't some small-time family lawyer. Leo Morrison is a partner at Sterling and Croft. They're sharks." "I have more sharks," Callahan retorted. "That's not the point. Look at this." David tapped a page. "They've already filed a motion to freeze a significant portion of your personal assets, citing risk of dissipation. They've documented everything. And I mean everything. The file contained the fruits of Ginevra's quiet investigation. It was terrifyingly thorough. There were credit card statements from a black card he kept for discretionary spending, highlighting charges for the penthouse lease dinners at restaurants he'd never taken Ginevra to, and the purchase from Cartier. There were phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts to a single number sashes. Most damningly, there was a sworn affidavit from a private investigator, a woman named Helen Sharp. This is where Callahan's hubris had truly betrayed him. He, a tech mogul, a man who'd made his fortune on data and surveillance, had been outmaneuvered. He thought back, trying to pinpoint the moment he'd lost control. The story, as pieced together by his own frantic security team, was a masterclass in quiet rebellion. It hadn't started with suspicion of an affair. It had started 3 months ago with a simple charitable donation. Ginevra sat on the board of a foundation for underprivileged youth. She'd pledged a significant sum at a gala, a sum she assumed would come from their joint philanthropic account. When she went to authorize the transfer, the account had several $1,000,000 less than she'd expected. She had asked him about it. He'd been dismissive, blaming a market fluctuation, a delayed wire transfer. "Don't worry about it, sweetheart. I'll handle the foundation." He'd patted her on the head, effectively dismissing her from the financial part of their lives, as he often did. That was his first mistake. He underestimated her. Ginevra wasn't just a pretty socialite. She had a degree in architecture and had run her own small but successful design firm before they married. She understood numbers. The discrepancy gnawed at her. It felt wrong. So she started digging quietly. She used a password. She wasn't supposed to know the name of their first dog, a detail he'd long forgotten, to access his personal expense reports, filed meticulously by his assistant. There, hidden among legitimate charges for private jets and client dinners, she found the recurring lease payment for a property in a building where they had no business. Project Olympus, he'd codenamed the expense. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. That's when she called her brother. Leo was everything Callahan was not: quiet, steady, and deeply moral. He had always been wary of Callahan's charismatic whirlwind, seeing the steel trap of control beneath the charm. He listened to his sister's trembling voice and told her to do nothing rash. He advised her to gather information, to play the part of the happy, oblivious wife while they built a fortress. Leo was the one who recommended Helen Sharp, a discreet ex-MI6 agent turned private investigator who specialized in high-net-worth individuals. Helen was a ghost. For 6 weeks, she followed Callahan. She documented his late-night visits to the penthouse. She photographed him with Sasha, laughing in a dimly lit bar, his hand resting possessively on her back. She even managed to get a source inside Cartier to confirm the bracelet purchase and its recipient. While Helen gathered the evidence, Ginevra played her role to perfection. She hosted dinner parties, smiled at his side at charity events, and discussed baby names with him, all while a storm of betrayal and heartbreak raged inside her. The strength it must have taken staggered him. He had looked into her eyes every night and seen only the reflection of his own lies. The final piece of the plan was the most brilliant and the most cutting. Ginevra knew Callahan's greatest weakness wasn't his lust, but his ego. A screaming, crying wife could be dismissed as hysterical. A calm, rational, business-like separation, that was a language he understood. She and Leo had spent weeks with her lawyers drafting the papers, planning the timing, and preparing for the inevitable scorched earth tactics Callahan would employ. She waited for the perfect moment. The night after he returned from a business trip to Tokyo, a trip he'd cut short by a day, telling her he missed her, when in reality he'd spent the last 24 hours with Sasha, who had coincidentally been there as well. That was the final insult. He had lain in their bed, fresh from another woman, and spoken of his love for her and their son. And so she had waited. She'd let him go to his board dinner. She dressed not for a fight, but for a corporate takeover of her own life. She laid the trap and waited for the Titan to walk into it. She built a kill box. Callahan David Chen concluded, his face grim. And you walked right into it. She has the evidence, the moral high ground, and a team of lawyers ready for war. She's not asking for an unreasonable settlement given your net worth. But on the matter of custody, she will not budge. And with this evidence of infidelity, and what they'll frame as moral negligence, she has a very, very strong case. Callahan stared out the window at the New York skyline, the buildings he'd once seen as his kingdom, now feeling like the bars of a cage. He had been so focused on conquering the world that he hadn't noticed the quiet, brilliant architect in his own home designing his demolition. The rage was still there, but now it was laced with a terrifying, grudging respect. He had been outplayed, and the game was just beginning. Losing Ginevra was a wound to his heart. Losing control was a wound to his soul. In the week that followed, Callahan oscillated between frantic attempts at reconciliation and a cold, calculated fury. He instructed David Chen to fight back on every front, to counterfile, to bury Leo Morrison and his team in paperwork. He would not lose his son. But his focus was fractured. The emotional turmoil was bleeding into his professional life. He was distracted in meetings, snapping at his executives, his mind constantly replaying that final chilling conversation with Ginevra. He sought refuge in the two things that had never failed him, work and Sasha. He called her the day after the confrontation. "We need to be more careful." He'd said, his voice tight. "Ginevra knows." There was a calculated pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, Callahan." "I'm so sorry," Sasha said, her voice a perfect blend of sympathy and concern. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to fix it," he'd growled. "But for now, I need a distraction." Their meetings became more frequent, more reckless. He no longer saw her at the penthouse, which his team was now scrubbing clean of any trace of her. Instead, they met at discreet hotels, under false names. The affair took on a new, feverish intensity. It wasn't just about pleasure anymore. For Callahan, it was an act of defiance. It was a way to numb the gnawing emptiness Ginevra's absence had carved inside him. Sasha, for her part, was more attentive, more intoxicating than ever. She listened to his tirades about the divorce, offering shrewd advice, couched in soft, sympathetic words. "She's using the baby as leverage, Callahan. It's a classic move," she'd whisper, tracing a finger along his jawline. "You need to protect your assets. More importantly, you need to protect your company." She started asking questions about Draven Innovations, not as a lover, but as a brilliant corporate mind. She was, after all, a top-tier executive. She spoke his language. She asked about Project Chimera, his revolutionary new AI-driven logistics software, the project that was set to double the company's value. He found himself confiding in her, complaining about supply chain issues with the quantum processors, about the friction he was facing from a key board member, Gerald Finney. It was a relief to talk to someone who understood. Ginevra had always supported his work, but she never truly understood the intricacies, the brutal beauty of the machine he had built. Sasha did. Meanwhile, his security chief Rob Miller was growing uneasy. Rob was a quiet, unassuming man in his 50s, ex-FBI, and fiercely loyal. He had been with Callahan since the beginning. He had handled Callahan's discretionary needs for years, always with quiet efficiency and a non-judgmental attitude. But this was different. He had seen the toll Ginevra's departure had taken on Callahan, and he did not trust Sasha Petrova. On his own initiative, Rob deepened his background check on her. The initial report had been standard. Born in Russia, emigrated as a child, brilliant academic record, meteoric rise in the corporate world. But Rob dug deeper, using old contacts in federal law enforcement and international intelligence. He found holes, gaps in her timeline, university records that seemed too perfect, a digital footprint that was almost non-existent before she joined her current firm. It was as if she had been professionally fabricated. His suspicions led him to investigate her employer, a mid-level tech firm called Cygnus. But Cygnus itself was a shell, its funding opaque. Following the money trail, Rob discovered its primary investor was a holding company based in the Cayman Islands. And that holding company was a subsidiary of a much larger, more formidable entity, Tanaka Corp. The name hit Rob like a punch to the gut. Kaito Tanaka. The ruthless, enigmatic CEO of Tanaka Corp was Callahan's biggest rival. For years, Tanaka had been trying to gain a foothold in the US market, always blocked by the dominance of Draven Innovations. Project Chimera was the very thing that would permanently lock Tanaka out. Rob felt a cold dread. This wasn't a simple affair. This was corporate espionage of the highest order. Sasha Petrova wasn't a mistress. She was a Trojan horse. He burst into Callahan's office without knocking a breach of protocol that spoke volumes. Callahan was on the phone, laughing at something Sasha had said. He looked up annoyed. "What is it, Rob? I'm busy." "So you need to hang up the phone," Rob said, his voice low and urgent. "Excuse me." Callahan's eyes narrowed. "Hang up the phone." Something in Rob's tone, a deadly seriousness Callahan had never heard before, made him comply. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, and ended the call. This had better be important. "It's Sasha Petrova," Rob said, placing a thin file on Callahan's desk. "She's not who you think she is. She works for Kaito Tanaka." Callahan stared at him, then laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Don't be ridiculous. She works for Cygnus. She's a competitor, sure, but Cygnus is a front for Tanaka Corp, funded entirely by them. Her job for the past year has been to get close to you." To get inside, Rob leaned forward, his face grim. "So think about what you've told her. Project Chimera, the supply chain vulnerabilities, your friction with Gerald Finney on the board. You haven't just been sleeping with the enemy. You've been giving her the blueprints to your entire kingdom." The color drained from Callahan's face. The casual conversations, the pillow talk about proprietary technology, the complaints about his board, it all flashed through his mind, recontextualized into acts of catastrophic self-sabotage. His affair hadn't been a mere indiscretion. It was treason against his own empire. He thought of her questions so sharp and insightful. He had seen it as intellectual passion. Now he saw it as interrogation. He thought of her sympathy about his divorce. He had seen it as comfort. Now he saw it as a tactic to exploit his emotional vulnerability. He had been played. The great Callahan Draven, the master of the universe, had been seduced and manipulated by an enemy agent. The humiliation was a physical thing, a burning acid in his throat. He had lost his wife because of a lie, and now it seemed he might lose his company because of that same lie. His world, which had been cracked by Ginevra, was now showing signs of complete structural failure. He looked at Rob, his eyes wide, with a new kind of terror. It was the terror of a king who suddenly realizes his castle is made of sand and the tide is coming in. The revelation of Sasha's betrayal sent Callahan into a tailspin. But it was a different kind of spiral than the one Ginevra had initiated. The divorce was an emotional, personal agony. This was a declaration of war. It was a landscape he understood. For the first time in weeks, the fog of heartbreak was pierced by the sharp, clarifying light of pure adrenaline. "Get me everything he commanded." His voice, a low growl. "I want to know what she ate for breakfast since she was 5 years old. I want to know every person she's ever spoken to, and get our cybersecurity team to do a deep sweep. Assume every system she could have known about is compromised." He then made 2 calls. The first was to David Chen. "The divorce strategy is changing," Callahan said, his voice cold as ice. "We're no longer fighting. We're capitulating. Give her everything she asked for in the initial filing. The house, the accounts, the settlement. No arguments. Just get it signed. I need this off my plate. Now." The second call was to a private number in Washington, D.C., to a man who officially didn't exist, a man who specialized in making corporate problems disappear. For the next 48 hours, Draven Innovations went into lockdown. Callahan, working with Rob and a skeleton crew of his most trusted engineers, unearthed the extent of the damage. It was worse than he imagined. Sasha hadn't needed to hack his systems. He had given her the keys. Details about Project Chimera's unique algorithmic architecture information about the financial weaknesses of his key suppliers, and most critically, the psychological profiles of his board members. He had handed it all to her on a silver platter during moments of perceived intimacy. He was a fool, a monumental, arrogant fool. The first blow landed 3 days later. Tanaka Corp announced a groundbreaking new AI logistics platform, Project Kitsune. The technical specifications described in their press release were shockingly similar to Callahan's own Project Chimera. The market buzzed with speculation. Had Draven's prized project been leaked, the company's stock took an immediate 10% hit. The second blow came 2 days after that. Tanaka Corp began aggressively poaching his key suppliers, offering them incredibly favorable terms, exploiting the very weaknesses Callahan had complained about to Sasha. His supply chain for the quantum processors was thrown into chaos. The third and most devastating blow was the hostile takeover bid. Leveraging the sudden dip in stock price and the narrative of instability, Tanaka Corp made a public offer to acquire Draven Innovations. The offer was just high enough to be tempting to shareholders who were spooked by the recent turmoil. Kaito Tanaka, in a public statement, spoke of synergies and a new era of leadership, a thinly veiled attack on Callahan's increasingly erratic behavior, which was now being selectively leaked to the financial press. Callahan found himself in a war on 2 fronts. His board was in a panic. The same people who had celebrated his genius a month ago were now whispering about his personal life, his reliability. His most vocal critic was Gerald Finney, the board member he'd complained about to Sasha. Finney, now sensing an opportunity, began to lobby other board members, arguing that accepting Tanaka's offer was the only way to save their investment. Callahan was trapped. He spent his days in brutal back-to-back meetings, trying to shore up support to fight off the corporate raid. He spent his nights alone in the cavernous, empty apartment, the silence a constant reminder of Ginevra. The home she had built felt like a museum of a dead life. He'd walk past the room they had designed as a nursery, the door now closed, and feel a physical ache in his chest. In a moment of desperation, he drove to her brother's brownstone. He waited outside for hours, hoping to catch her. When she finally emerged, her pregnancy more pronounced than ever, she looked healthy, serene. She was glowing. He got out of the car and for a moment, seeing the shock on her face, he thought he saw a flicker of the old affection. "Ginevra, please," he began, his voice raw. "Just talk to me." She held up a hand, stopping him. "Callahan, there's nothing to talk about. My lawyer received the signed papers from David. You agreed to everything. I appreciate you not making it difficult." "I don't care about the money, Ginevra," he said, taking a step closer. "I was a fool. I know that. I made the biggest mistake of my life. But my company, my life's work, it's all falling apart." She looked at him, and there was no pity in her eyes, only a quiet finality. "That company is the reason our marriage failed, Callahan. You cared more about it than you ever cared about us. You talk about it like it's your child. Well, I'm about to have a real child, and my only concern is his future, a future far away from your drama and your betrayals." "They're connected," he said, his voice rising in desperation. "The woman I was with, she was a corporate spy. She stole my research. Tanaka is trying to take my company. Everything that I was going to give to you to Spencer, it could all be gone." He expected shock sympathy, perhaps even a rallying to his side. Instead, Ginevra's expression hardened. "So let me understand this," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "The affair you had, the one that destroyed our family and is costing you your legacy, wasn't even for passion or love. It was for your ego. You were so busy being the smartest man in the room that you let an enemy walk right through your front door, and you handed her your crown. And now you come to me, the woman you humiliated, expecting what help absolution?" She shook her head, a sad, bitter smile on her lips. "You reap what you sow, Callahan. You built your empire on the idea that you were untouchable. Maybe it's time you learned what it feels like to fall." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing on the sidewalk as the city bustled around him, utterly alone. Her words echoed in his mind, more damning than anything Kaito Tanaka could ever say. She was right. He had treated his life like a game of chess, and he had sacrificed his queen for nothing, only to find himself in checkmate. The emergency board meeting to vote on the Tanaka takeover was in 2 days. He had no moves left. The air in the 40th floor boardroom of Draven Innovations was thick with tension and the smell of fear. Callahan stood at the head of the massive oak table, the city skyline, a glittering, indifferent backdrop. He looked out at the faces of his board members, men and women who had ridden his coattails to immense wealth, who had toasted his name at galas, who were now looking at him like he was a liability. Gerald Finney sat at the opposite end, his expression smug, a folder from Tanaka Corp placed neatly in front of him. Callahan had spent the last 48 hours in a desperate last-ditch effort to rally support. He had called in every favor, leveraged every relationship, and presented a counter-strategy, a radical restructuring, and a stock buyback plan to consolidate control. But it was too little, too late. The narrative was set. Callahan Draven, the brilliant but reckless founder, had let his personal chaos compromise the company. Tanaka's offer was safe. It was stable. The facts are clear. Finney was saying, his voice resonating with false sincerity. Mr. Tanaka's offer represents a 30% premium on our current market value. It provides stability in a time of unprecedented turmoil and protects shareholder value. Mr. Draven's personal complications have put this company at grave risk. Callahan listened, his jaw tight. He could see the votes slipping away. He had started with 4 solid allies. Now he was down to 1, maybe 2. The others refused to meet his gaze. A vote for the Tanaka acquisition is a vote to sell the soul of this company. Callahan countered, his voice hoarse with fatigue. We are innovators. We don't get acquired. We acquire. Project Chimera. My project will redefine global logistics. Selling now is like selling Apple the day before they announced the iPhone. An iPhone that your competitor is already marketing, Finney retorted sharply. Your personal indiscretion has handed our crown jewels to the enemy, Callahan. This vote is not about the company's soul. It's about damage control. The room fell silent. The motion was on the table. The chairman of the board, a stern man named Howard Price, cleared his throat. We will now proceed to the vote. All in favor of accepting the acquisition offer from Tanaka Corp. Suddenly, the heavy boardroom doors swung open. Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway was Ginevra Draven. A collective gasp went through the room. She was 8 months pregnant now, a vision of maternal strength in a simple, elegant navy blue dress. Beside her stood her brother, Leo Morrison, carrying a leather briefcase. Callahan stared, his heart hammering against his ribs. He thought he was hallucinating. Ginevra, what are you doing here? Gerald Finney stood up, his face flushing with anger. This is a closed board meeting, security. She has a right to be here. Leo said, his voice calm and authoritative, as he stepped forward, opening his briefcase. He placed a document on the table. Pursuant to the prenuptial and post-nuptial agreements signed by Mr. and Mrs. Draven, 10% of Mr. Draven's founding shares are held in an irrevocable trust for his marital issue. As the legal guardian of the soul, albeit unborn beneficiary of that trust, Mrs. Draven is entitled to exercise the voting rights of those shares. A stunned silence descended. Callahan had forgotten. Years ago, in a moment of what he'd considered grand romanticism after they decided to start a family, he had set up the trust. It was an ironclad, unchangeable instrument designed to protect his future children. He never imagined it would be used against him, or for him. He had no idea what she was about to do. Ginevra walked slowly to the table, her presence commanding the full attention of the room. She didn't look at Callahan. She addressed the board. Ginevra Tillman, I have read Mr. Tanaka's proposal, and I have read my husband's counter-proposal. She used the word husband with a deliberate clinical precision. Both are flawed. Mr. Tanaka seeks to cannibalize this company for its intellectual property. Callahan seeks to maintain a status quo that his own reckless behavior has proven is unsustainable. She paused, her cool blue eyes sweeping across the faces of the board members. I am not here to save my husband. In fact, I agree with Mr. Finney. Callahan's leadership has become a liability. Callahan felt the blood drain from his face. This was it. She was here to deliver the final killing blow. However she continued, her voice gaining strength, I am also not here to watch the company that will one day form my son's birthright be sold for parts to our greatest rival. There is a third option. She looked directly at Howard Price, the chairman. I will be voting the trust's 10% share against the Tanaka acquisition. I know for a fact that this vote, combined with the shares still loyal to Callahan, is enough to block the sale. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. Finney looked apoplectic, but Ginevra added, raising her hand for silence, my vote is conditional. I am proposing a motion of no confidence in Callahan Draven as CEO. Callahan felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. I propose he be removed from his position effective immediately. He will retain his shares and a title Chief Innovation Officer perhaps, but he will have no executive authority. In his place, I nominate Howard Price as interim CEO, tasked with stabilizing the company, neutralizing the threat from Tanaka, and guiding Project Chimera to its launch. She had done it. In one move, she had checkmated everyone. She had saved the company from Tanaka, but she had taken Callahan's throne. She wasn't saving him. She was saving the company from him. "This is my son's legacy you're gambling with," she concluded, her voice ringing with indisputable moral authority. "I will not allow it to be destroyed by corporate vultures from the outside, nor by the ego of a broken man from the inside. The choice is yours, a hostile takeover or a new beginning. Vote." The room was silent for a full 30 seconds. Then Howard Price, a man known for his cautious pragmatism, looked at Ginevra, then at Callahan's shattered expression, and finally at the furious face of Gerald Finney. "I second Mrs. Dreven's motion," Price said. The vote was a formality. One by one, the board members fell in line. The Tanaka deal was dead, and so was Callahan's reign as CEO. Ginevra turned and walked out of the room without a single backward glance. She hadn't come as a wife or an ex-wife. She had come as a queen, protecting her heir's inheritance. Callahan Dreven was left standing in the ruins of his own kingdom, dethroned by the very woman he had so carelessly discarded. He had lost everything that defined him, and in a final brutal twist of irony, he had been saved by the one person he had wronged the most. The 6 months that followed the boardroom coup felt like a slow, agonizing crawl through the wreckage of a life. The world did not end in a fiery explosion. It simply remade itself meticulously, erasing Callahan Dreven from its center. The initial shock of his dethronement gave way to a bitter, impotent rage. He was a king in exile, forced to walk the halls of a palace that was no longer his. His new title, Chief Innovation Officer, was a cruel joke, a gilded cage, where he could see his vision for Project Chimera come to life, but was forbidden to touch the controls. He'd sit in strategy meetings, a silent ghost at the table listening, as Howard Price, calm, effective, and utterly in charge, issued directives about the project Callahan had bled for. The board members, once his loyal disciples, would offer him polite, pitying nods before turning back to the new son. His suggestions were heard with patient indulgence, then quietly shelved. The company he had built from a dream in a garage now hummed along with a new, more stable rhythm, and he was forced to accept the terrifying truth it didn't need him. His nights were the worst. The sprawling penthouse, once a symbol of his ascent, became a monument to his isolation. Every empty room echoed with Ginevra's absence. He'd stand before the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights glittering below, like a sea of jewels he could no longer possess, and feel an emptiness so profound it was a physical weight in his chest. The rage began to exhaust itself, burning away, until only the cold grey ash of despair remained. He started seeing a therapist, a decision the old Callahan would have mocked as the ultimate admission of weakness. Dr. Alani was a sharp, unassuming woman who refused to be swayed by his lingering charisma or his attempts to intellectualize his pain. "You didn't just lose a company, Mr. Dreven," she said, during one session, her words cutting through his defenses. "You lost the mirror that told you who you were. The question is what's left when there are no reflections." The question haunted him. Without the titles, CEO, husband, visionary, who was he? The answer he feared was nothing. Then, on a rainy Tuesday in October, his phone buzzed. He expected another sterile corporate update. Instead, it was a text from a number he hadn't contacted in months, Leo Morrison. It contained only a time, a hospital name, and 3 words that shattered the last of his defenses. It's a girl. A girl. Not Spencer. A daughter. He stared at the words, his mind struggling to process them. All his plans, his arrogant projections for a male heir to carry on the Draven name and legacy, dissolved into static. He had built an entire future around a son who never existed, another extension of his own ego, a daughter. She was entirely her own person, a new and unknown variable in an equation he thought he had solved. He stumbled back from his desk, the phone slipping from his grasp. A great shuddering sob tore through him, a sound of pure, unadulterated grief. He collapsed into his chair and wept. Not for his lost empire or his wounded pride, but for the profound, irreversible loss of his family, for the precious years he had squandered, and for a little girl, a stranger, whom he had wronged before she had even taken her first breath. That breakdown was a baptism. The man who stood up afterward was not the same one who had fallen. The last vestiges of his rage and self-pity were washed away, leaving a raw, humbled core. He returned to his office, not to reclaim power, but to find purpose. He began to work, truly work, for the first time in years. He sketched new ideas on a simple notepad, not for market disruption, but for the simple, forgotten joy of creation. He rediscovered the spark that had driven him as a young man in a garage long before it became twisted into a tool for ego and domination. 2 months later, his hands trembling slightly, he dialed Leo's number. He had rehearsed what he would say, but when Leo answered, the practiced words vanished. "I want to see her," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual command. "Please, no demands, no conditions. I need to see my daughter, if Ginevra will allow it." A week later, he found himself standing on the rain-slicked steps of a beautiful light-filled brownstone in a part of the city he rarely visited. It wasn't as grand as his penthouse, but the warm light spilling from the windows and the sound of soft music from within spoke of a life being lived, not just displayed. Ginevra opened the door. She looked tired in the way all new mothers do, but a deep, unshakable serenity radiated from her. Motherhood wasn't just suiting her. It had fortified her. She led him into a living room filled with art books and the comfortable clutter of a new baby. On a large table, architectural drafts were spread out, her own relaunched firm clearly thriving. This was her world built from the ground up on her own terms. In a bassinet by the window, bathed in the soft afternoon light, his daughter was sleeping. He approached with the reverence of a man entering a holy site. She was a swirl of pink skin, dark hair, and impossibly delicate features. He could see a hint of himself in the shape of her mouth, a trace of Ginevra in the curve of her brow. He reached out, a hesitant, trembling finger, and gently touched her tiny hand. Her fingers, no bigger than grains of rice, instinctively curled around his. In that moment, the entire world fell away. There were no stock prices, no boardrooms, no betrayals. There was only this perfect, breathing miracle, and a wave of pure, unselfish love so powerful it brought tears to his eyes. "Her name is Hope Ginevra," said softly from behind him. The name was a final, devastating blow to his old self. It was everything he had lost, and everything she had managed to build from the ruins. "She's beautiful," he whispered, unable to look away. He stayed for nearly an hour, watching his daughter sleep. When it was time to leave, he finally turned to Ginevra, his eyes filled with a regret so profound it was almost a physical presence in the room. "I'm sorry, Ginevra," he said, the words raw and uncalculated. He had to force them past the lump in his throat. Not for the company or the money or any of it. I'm sorry for us, for you, for being so blind, for not seeing what I had until it was designing my demolition from across the room." A small, sad smile touched her lips. It held no malice, only a weary understanding. "I know Callahan." There was no talk of reconciliation. The love they had once shared was a casualty of his war with himself, a delicate thing that could not be rebuilt. But as he stood there, he realized this wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something else, entirely. Quieter, humbler. He had lost his kingdom, his queen and his crown. But in the ruins, watching the gentle rise and fall of his daughter's chest, he finally understood. The most valuable asset he had ever possessed wasn't a company forged in his own image. It was a family. And he would spend the rest of his life quietly, patiently, trying to earn the right to be a small part of this new one. Callahan Dreven's story serves as a chilling reminder that the highest towers can cast the longest shadows. He had every material object a person could desire, yet he lost the only things that truly mattered: trust, love, and family. It wasn't the affair itself that destroyed him, but the arrogance and blindness that allowed it to happen. Ginevra, on the other hand, shows us the incredible strength that can be found in the deepest betrayals, not by screaming and crying, but by quietly, intelligently, and strategically reclaiming her own life and her child's future. What do you think was Callahan's downfall deserved? Was Ginevra's move in the boardroom a moment of ultimate empowerment or cold revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who appreciates a tale of drama and consequence. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that explore the complexities of the human heart.